Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. From October 28th through November 4th, Flipside Gaming is holding their Halloween sale. During this time, when you use the promo code HEROES, you will receive 15% off all orders over $10 instead of the usual 10%. Remember though, to support the channel, you must enter the HEROES promo code to replace the default one like you see on the screen. Also, they now have pre-orders open for Theros Beyond Death Draft and collect your booster boxes while supplies last. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and it's that time of the week again where we go back and look at the results from the big Magic the Gathering tournaments from the weekend. Last weekend, we had the Star City Games Atlanta events, and they held a Standard Classic, a Modern Classic, and a Modern Open. We'll be looking at the top 8s from those events, as well as a number of deck lists, with a special focus on cards from Throne of Eldraine and how they performed this weekend. Now, before we get into it, just a quick reminder, this week is the big sale at FlipsideGaming.com. If you use the Heroes promo code, you'll get 15% off instead of 10% off like you normally do. But remember, to support the channel, you do have to put in the Heroes promo code to kind of overwrite the default one that's in there. That's always appreciated, so thank you in advance. But without any further ado, let's get into it. Okay, we're going to begin as we always do with Standard, and this is the Star City Games Standard Classic, a smaller event compared to when they do an Open. But the results of this top 8 are very telling as to what's going on right now in the environment. So Monday, they did ban Field of the Dead, which nobody was surprised about. And maybe, again, nobody was surprised that what happened to the meta was it just shifted very dramatically towards Oko, and in particular now Sultai Food. Why Sultai Food over Simic Food? Well, remember when Field of the Dead was the deck to beat, what was happening, people were putting in cards in their main deck to kind of deal with those strategies. Now people are just trying to deal with Oko in the main deck, and they're trying to get ahead of the curve with their own Okos. That's basically what Standard has become right now. So let's look at the top 8, then we'll talk a little more about that. Sultai Food came in first place, second place, third place, as well as fifth place. Fourth place was Jeskai Fires, that also came in sixth place. Seventh place was Rakdos Aggro. Eighth place was Four Color Wolves. Okay, here's the thing with Oko. Definitely format warping. Wizards did come out. They mentioned on a stream yesterday, Paul Cheon and Melissa DeTora, that they did underestimate the power of this card in testing. And they did say they're not going to do any bans. Wizards in their Twitter account yesterday, I believe it was, said they're not banning anything through the Mythic Championship, but the next banned and restricted list update is November 18th. Kind of felt like a hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Oko probably going away in Standard, most likely. So, again, that's going to be the second time during the Standard season that there's going to be big upheaval, if that's the case. Also, speculation, maybe we lose Oko in some other formats. If they're really serious about Pioneer being successful, maybe they just go ahead and ban it there. Modern, you're going to see later in the video, Heart is kind of all over the place there too, and is starting to push that format in a certain direction. And who knows, maybe in other places too. All right, with that being said, let's go ahead and look at some of these deck lists and see what was going on here. Okay, here's the first place Sultai Food deck. So very similar to the Simic Food decks that we saw last week perform really well. But like I said, you're bringing black in here. It's going to allow you to play Vraska, Golgari Queen, which is going to be good against Oko. And also, there's 4 copies of Noxious Grasp right here in the main. So there you have it. Okay, let's take a look at the cards from Throne of Eldraine that are here. Oko, Thief of Crowns. Get used to seeing that. Gilded Goose, Wicked Wolf, Once Upon a Time, another very popular card, not only in Standard but Modern. And Fabled Passage. Fabled Passage, that card is a Standard staple. You're going to see a lot of it today. Also, it looks like it's going to be a big part of Pioneer, too. In the sideboard, you have Lovestruck Beast, Questing Beast, and Mystical Dispute. Now, many main decks also run Garrett Cursed Huntsman. This one wasn't, but actually the majority of the decks that performed well were. Fourth place, Jeskai Fires. There's a couple different takes on this variety of deck. In this particular one, it's a little more creature-centric. You have the 4 Cavalier of Flame, the 4 Cavalier of Gals. Others are going to be more Planeswalker-centric. We're going to look at a 4-color variation of this a little bit later that is running more Planeswalkers and less creatures, just so you get an idea. But pretty much what we've been seeing in past weeks. This one hasn't changed all that much. Let's go ahead and take a look at the cards, though, from Throne of Eldraine. Quite a few. Kenrith the Returned King is here. Obviously, if you're not doing anything else with your mana, this is a good place to dump it. Fae of Wishes, Bonecrusher Giant, Fires of Invention, of course, Castle Vantress, and Fabled Passage. In the sideboard, you have Mystical Dispute. Some other sideboards of this deck will run Garrett Cursed Huntsman in the side, and remember, with the Jeskai version of this deck, because you're using Fires of Invention, many times you still do find a number of cards that cost black and the casting cost in the side, and other decks will use Bone Crusher Giant out of the sideboard. Okay, let's look at Rakdos Aggro that came in 7th place. Now, this is a deck that early on people had a lot of high hopes for, and it just didn't pan out in the meta. It wasn't doing as well as a lot of people expected, especially early on in the format. I do think there was a little hope, though, for some of these aggro decks, considering the Mythic Championship 5 went to a Gruul aggro deck. And this one does put up a nice result this week. One thing I do have to point out, though, quickly about this deck list, it looks like Star City Games did have an inputting error here. There are 70 cards in the main. My assumption is there's not really 20 swamps in this deck. That would be way too many lands. Maybe it's supposed to be 10. Perhaps that's the only mistake here, but nevertheless, you're going to see here that you have a lot of the big aggressive cards that we've been thinking were going to be good for a while. Things like Spawn of Mayhem are here. You got 4 Gutter Bones, 4 Knight of the Ebon Legion, a couple Lava Coils, but this is a very creature-centric aggressive deck. Here's the cards from Throne of Eldraine: Murderous Rider, Rankle, Master of Pranks, Bone Crusher Giant again, Robber of the Rich, and Castle Loch Thwain. The sideboard has Embereth Shieldbreaker. Rounding out the top 8 is another deck that a lot of people thought was going to be good early on in the format and then didn't do a lot. It's 4-color Wolves. But this latest version of the deck is very similar to the food ramp decks. However, you see more of a wolf strategy here because you have the 4 Night Pack Ambushers, for example, but you're also going to see a lot of very familiar cards. Now, aside from the Ambushers, you get 3 Telsomere Friend of Wolves here, Garrett Cursed Huntsman, which we'll look at in a second. That's going to play a larger role here, 3 of those in the main. Let's go ahead and look at the cards from Throne of Eldraine, though. So there's Garrett Cursed Huntsman, but then there's a lot of cards that look like they just belong in those other decks we looked at, right? Oko, Thief of Crowns, Gilded Goose, Wicked Wolf, Once Upon a Time, and Fabled Passage. Okay, we'll go beyond the top 8 now. In 9th place was the 4-color Fires deck that I mentioned earlier. So some of the Jeskai decks do a similar thing to this. This one is just very Planeswalker heavy, as you can see. Not as many creatures compared to the one we looked at earlier. 4 Fae of Wishes here, but then you get 4 Narset, 4 Nicol Bolas Dragon God, one of the good reasons to run black, 2 Sarkhan the Masterless, 4 Teferi Time Raveler. Now, in the main, you get 3 Fires of Invention. There's also one in the sideboard. We'll see those again in a second. There's other cards, though, that really reward you for playing black, like Noxious Grasp, one of those in the main, and we talked about how important that could be right now. 2 Epic Downfall, you get 3 Ritual of Soot, 1 the Elder Spell, 4 Thought Erasure. So this does have a different feel to it. Here's the cards from Throne of Eldraine: Fae of Wishes, Epic Downfall, and of course Fires of Invention. In the sideboard, another copy of Fires of Invention. 11th place was something a little different because, hey, it wasn't running Oko, so that's weird. Golgari Henge. Okay, this is kind of sweet. Now, take a look at what it's doing here. Basically, it's a ramp deck, but it's also going into some really economical creatures quickly. It's not necessarily trying to cast, like, huge stuff right off the bat. So you got Questing Beast here, Spawn of Mayhem, Routing Regisaur, Murderous Rider, which is great offensively and defensively, Knight of the Ebon Legion. And as far as ramp goes, you got a Boreal Grazer, Incubation Druid is here, the Great Henge, of course, 4 of those. You also get 4 Growth Chamber Guardians. So this is a little more of an old school approach to this type of thing. Very unique build, though. Okay, let's look at the cards from the new set, and of course, we mentioned a lot of them already. Murderous Rider, Questing Beast, the Great Henge, Castle Loch Thwain, and Fabled Passage. Okay, let's go to 12th place, and it's a Bant ramp deck. So another ramp deck here. This is interesting because at first glance, it looks like those food ramp decks that we saw, especially the Bant variety. They were popular a week ago. Now, everything's kind of pushed a little more towards Sultai, at least the ones that were more successful, as you saw earlier. But this put up a good result too, and this is doing something slightly different. So you see a lot of similarities. Let me point those out first. Sure, Gilded Goose, which we'll look at, Paradise Druids, 4 of those, 4 Hydroid Crisis, 3 Arboreal Grazers here. But here's what's different about this deck. 4 Stone Coil Serpent, that's kind of interesting. 3 copies of Chulane Teller of Tales in the main. That is very different from anything we've seen before. Now, when it comes to Planeswalkers, you do get 3 copies of Nissa, 3 Oko, 1 Teferi Time Raveler. So this is just a little bit of a twist on what we have been seeing. Not vastly different, but different enough that I wanted to point it out. Okay, a lot of Throne of Eldraine cards here. Oko, Thief of Crowns, Gilded Goose, Wicked Wolf, Stonecoil Serpent, Chulane, Teller of Tales, Once Upon a Time, Castle Garenbrig, Castle Vantress, and Fabled Passage. In the sideboard, you have another Wicked Wolf, Mystical Dispute, and Glass Casket. 13th place, Rakdos Aggro. So yep, it's another Rakdos Aggro deck. Usually I don't show you two of the same decks in this video. However, this is actually very different compared to the one we looked at earlier. I would probably have called this one a Rakdos Aggro Knight build. It is very Knight-centric with some Knight synergies. We'll dig deeper into those when we look at the cards from Throne of Eldraine. Some of the non-Throne of Eldraine cards here, though, are Rotting Regisaur, so that's not too surprising for this type of build nowadays. You're also going to get 4 copies of Knight of the Ebon Legion, of course. Sandgrass Rampage is here. This is a further evolution of the Mardu variety of this deck we saw just a week ago. Okay, a lot of cards from Throne of Eldraine. As you can see, a lot of Knights here. You get Black Lance Paragon, which does interact with other Knights. Murderous Rider, Order of Midnight, Rankle Master of Pranks, Fervent Champion also interacts well with the other Knights. Stormfist Crusader, Embercleave is here. Very popular card at the Mythic Championship number 5. Although, as you can see, it kind of fell off this week. Castle Lock Thwain, Fabled Passage, and Tournament Grounds. And in the sideboard, you have Epic Downfall and Red Cap Melee. On to the 14th place, Simic Food Ramp deck. Okay, so we've seen a lot of variations of this type of thing. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but this is more like the variation of the deck we saw last week. It's not running black for Vraska or Noxious Grasp. But as you can see here, it's pretty familiar. You get a lot of the cards from Throne of Eldraine that we have been seeing, which we'll look at again in a second. 3 copies of Hydroid Krasis for Paradise Druid are here. You get 3 copies of Vivian Arcbow Ranger, which was a very successful card last week during the Mythic Championship 5 tournament again. You got Nissa Who Shakes the World, 4 copies of those in the main. Here's your cards from Throne of Eldraine, though. A lot of the same ones. Oko Thief of Crowns. You do get Brazen Borrower here, though. Gilded Goose, Questing Beast, Wicked Wolf, Once Upon a Time, Castle Garenbrig, and Castle Vantress. In the sideboard, you have Lovestruck Beast. Some sideboards also run Mystical Dispute. Alright, on to Modern. With the bigger event of the two, we're going to look at the Star City Games Modern Open. Now, as you can see, the Modern format looked a little stale this week, too. And I'll give you a few guesses as to which card maybe was the most responsible for that. Starts with an O, ends in an O, in the middle is K. Okay, so the first place deck was Grixis Death Shadow. We'll look at that in a second. Second place, third place, fourth place, sixth place, Simic Wurza, also known as Simic Urzethopter Sword. Fifth place was Amulet Titan. Seventh place Urza Midrange. And eighth place was Devoted Devastation. Okay, so Simic Wurza, very dominant, didn't come in first place, but did very well. And it is a variation of the Urzethopter Sword decks we have been seeing, but why are we going into Simic colors? Well, obviously it's because of Oko. So let's look at the first place deck, Grixis Death Shadow, first, then we'll get into those. Okay, here it is. 4 copies of Death Shadow, 4 Gurmag Angler, 3 Snapcaster Mage. For the most part, this looks pretty familiar, right? But there is a difference. You got a copy of the Royal Scions in the main. Another copy in the sideboard, as well as a copy of Mystical Dispute. Some variations on this deck, though, are running Drown in the Loch in the main, and others are running it in the sideboard, too. Okay, on to Simic Wurza. Now, this deck has really been influenced by Throne of Eldraine. It's not just Oko. We're going to see some other cards here. I'll pull them all up in a second. But what is the same, first off? Well, you still have Urza, Lord High Artificer, 4 copies of that. This version of the deck running 1 copy of Sword of the Meek and 1 copy of Thopter Foundry, so there's your combo. You get 2 copies of War of Invention in here, 4 Mox Opals in this one. So when you look at the artifacts and such, the deck doesn't look too different. Let's look at the cards from Throne of Eldraine, though. Here's the cards that are really influencing the build right now. Oko Thief of Crowns, of course. Emery Lurker of the Loch, sure. Gilded Goose is even here, and Mystic Sanctuary. In the sideboard, you have Drown in the Loch. And some other sideboards of this deck are running Mystical Dispute. Fifth place was Amulet Titan, a deck that's actually been doing very well recently. And it does get a little boost because of Throne of Eldraine, which we'll look at in a second, but for the most part, the core of the deck is the same. 4 Primeval Titan, 1 Reclamation Sage here in the main, 4 Sakura Tribe Scout, 4 Azusa Lost But Seeking, 4 copies of Amulet of Vigor, of course. Throne of Eldraine, though, brings 4 copies of Once Upon a Time to the main, and 2 copies of Castle Garenbrig. And you're going to find Mystical Dispute in the sideboard. And some other sideboards of this variety of deck are also running, of course, Oko Thief of Crowns. 7th place was Urza Midrange, but very, very similar to the Simic Wurza decks we just saw. Here's the big difference, though. No Thopter Foundry, no Sword of the Meek, no War of Invention. but the rest of the deck looks pretty familiar, right? The cards from Throne of Eldraine, Oko Thief of Crowns, Emry Lurker of the Loch, Gilded Goose, Witching Well is here, and Mystic Sanctuary. And in the sideboard, Drown in the Loch. 8th place, Devoted Devastation, another deck running a number of Throne of Eldraine cards, which we'll look at in just a second. Other than those new cards, though, yeah, the core of the deck is very similar to what you have been seeing. You're going to find Devoted Druids here, 4 of those, 3 Vizier of Remedies, 4 Finale of Devastation. And here we go again, Oko Thief of Crowns is here, Gilded Goose, and Once Upon a Time, all in the main. And we get another copy of Oko in the sideboard. Okay, we'll go beyond the top 8 and look at a few other decks. 9th place was 4-color Urza. Again, not too different. Now, this time we do bring back Thopter Foundry 4 copies this time. 2 copies of Sword of the Meek, 2 copies of War of Invention. You also get 4 Mox Opals in this variety of the deck, 4 Arcum's Astrolabe. But maybe the bigger difference compared to some of the other variations on this is the 3 copies of Goblin Engineer in the main. When it comes to Throne of Eldraine's influence, though, a lot of the same things. Oko Thief of Crowns and Emry Lurker of the Loch are here. And in the sideboard, another copy of Oko and Mystical Dispute. Crabvine came in 11th place. So this is kind of a take on the Crabvine decks that we saw back before they went ahead and banned Hogak. So yeah, even without Hogak, this can still put up a good result, so that's pretty cool to see. And if you're familiar with that old version of the deck, not too much has changed here. You're going to get 4 Hedron Crabs, you got 4 Vegvines, 4 Stitcher Suppliers, 4 Creeping Chill, this version running 4 Glimpse the Unthinkable. But there is some influence from Throne of Eldraine. Merfolk's Secret Keeper is here, as well as Once Upon a Time. 16th place was Humans. This deck has kind of fallen off a little bit. I mean, this is still a good result, but I remember when there was always a Humans deck in the top 8. Not so much anymore, but I did want to point this out because there is a card from Throne of Eldraine in the main, 2 copies of Charming Prince. Azorius Stoneblade came in 18th place. So if you're familiar with the Stoneblade decks, again, nothing too revolutionary here. 4 copies of Stoneforge Mystic, and then as far as the artifacts go in the main, you get a Batterskull and a Sword of Feast and Famine in this version. When it comes to Planeswalkers, 1 Jace the Mind Sculptor, 3 Teferi Time Ravelers. Throne of Eldraine contributes with 2 copies of Mystic Sanctuary in the main, and 2 copies of Mystical Dispute in the sideboard. 20th place was 4-color Death Shadow. You know, Grixis Death Shadow did do well coming in first place, but why play that when you could add Oko and go with 4 colors instead? So, of course, we'll look at Oko in a second. There's 2 copies here in the main. Other than that, you got Death Shadow, Tarmogoyf, 4 of those. And there it is, Oko Thief of Crowns and Once Upon a Time in the main. Okay, Urza Outcome. This came in 23rd place. Interesting, because a few weeks back, we thought this was going to be the Urza deck to kind of take over Modern. Well, that was before Oko really made its presence felt, and Urza Outcome didn't do as good. Obviously, less people opting for this variety of the deck. Now, you're going to see similarities, sure, and we're going to look at those new cards in a second, but you got Urza here, 4 copies, 2 copies of Sai, 2 copies of Saheeli Sublime Artificer. When you go over to the artifacts, no, you're not going to see things like War of Invention or Thopter Foundry or Sword of the Meek, but you do get 4 copies of Paradoxical Outcome here. 3 copies of Mox Amber in this build, 4 copies of Mox Opal. Emry Lurker of the Loch was the big contribution here from Throne of Eldraine. And, of course, Oko Thief of Crowns shows up in the sideboard. Other varieties, though, of this type of deck are also running Witching Well and Mystic Sanctuary in the main. Okay, on to the Star City Games Modern Classic. So this was a smaller event. Sure, it does look a little more diverse, but still, look at those Urza decks. 2nd place, 3rd place, 8th place, Simic Urza. 4th place, Grixis Death Shadow. 5th place, Jund Goblins. That's kind of cool. We'll look at that one. 6th place, Mono Green Tron. 7th place, Amulet Titan. Okay, 1st place was Izadelver. So you don't see a lot of Izadelver decks taking down Modern tournaments, so this is kind of interesting. 4 copies of Young Pyromancer, 4 copies of Snapcaster Mage, 4 Delver of Secrets, and a lot of control elements. You have 4 Force of Negation in here, 4 Lightning Bolts, 2 Magmatic Sinkholes, 1 Mana Leak. Pretty sweet build, actually. Mystic Sanctuary in the main here. And Mystical Dispute in the sideboard again. Here's your 5th place Jund Goblins deck. Really cool build. I love tribal builds in Modern, and I'm a sucker for these whenever they do well. And, as you can see here, there's a lot of goblins. Goblin Cratermaker, Goblin Matron, Goblin Ringleader, Goblin War Chief, so on and so forth. And we even get a copy of Grumgully the Generous in the main, and of course, Once Upon a Time is here too. 6th place, Mono Green Tron. We haven't seen one of those yet today. And that's a little surprising. I mean, Mono Green Tron was one of the big decks to beat for so long. This variety running 3 Wormcoil engines, 2 Thought-Knots here, though, 2 Thragtusk, and then you get your Planeswalkers here, Karn Liberated for those, Karn the Great Creator for those, 1 Ugin the Spirit Dragon, and of course you have your Tron lands and a lot of ways to try to pull it together, including Once Upon a Time from Throne of Eldraine. 15th place is Ori's Control, very similar to the Stoneblade deck we saw earlier, just not running the Stoneblade package, of course. And what you see instead is just a little more devotion to control. 3 Snapcaster Mage, 2 Jace the Mind Sculptor, 2 Narset, 1 Big Teferi, 2 Little Teferi, and a lot of spells that are going to try to control the board. Mystic Sanctuary is here, though, too, in the main. And Mystical Dispute shows up yet again in the side. Infect came in 16th place. And Infect hasn't changed too much. I mean, if you look at the main deck here, you get Spellskite, 2 of those, Bladed Agent, 4 of those, 4 Glistening Elves, so on and so forth. But there is some influence here, as you can imagine, from Throne of Eldraine. Once Upon a Time in the main. And yup, Oko Thief of Crowns in the side. Well, that wraps up the weekend, and wow, Oko Thief of Crowns, huh? Definitely Warping Standard, like I said, pretty confident that's going to get banned on November 18th. Modern, will they ban it there? I mean, I guess give Modern a week or two to adjust, but there's a chance. And I do think they could just go ahead and outright ban it in Pioneer too, just to protect that new format. This is a very, very, very powerful card, obviously. And yeah, you know, it's tough because there's a small group of people testing these cards at Wizards. It's their job to do it, and you would hope that they could find stuff like this. But it's kind of like video game bugs, right? I mean, until you have thousands and thousands of people playing a video game and finding every little flaw, then they have to kind of come back and create a patch. This is similar. Unfortunately, there is such an investment here compared to like a $60 video game that you might be a little frustrated if you just bought WWE 2K20, right? And they're going to have to patch a lot of that game, I'm sure. But you could be spending a lot more than $60 on a standard deck that gets banned. And then if you were playing Field of the Dead and that got banned, and then you played Oko and that got banned, yikes. I mean, that is enough to turn anybody off to a format very quickly. So yeah, Wizards has to come up with something here to prevent this type of thing from happening again in the future. I mean, I know it's going to happen from time to time, but it just seems like the last couple of years, especially since they've been pushing power more and more, we've been running into more and more of these problems along with that. So we'll have to see what happens. But until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon and have a great day.